Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the invitation to speak to the conference today. It's an innovative way of doing it, and I congratulate the organiser of this for putting this on. It's a bit strange to speak into a computer as opposed to into an audience. I've presented a number of times to audiences in the past, which is always an enjoyable experience, but I'm a bit new to the idea of presenting at a webinar. So we'll bear with me and we'll see how this goes. Just to introduce myself before we go further, yes, I'm Jono Brent. I've been the Chief Executive of Connetics Limited in Christchurch. I'll tell you a bit more about Connetics in the next 10 minutes or so. I've been there for nearly 9 years. I started, the best way I can describe it is I started after the Christchurch earthquake in September 2010 and before the earthquake in February 2011. So I was, I'd only been there 2 or 3 weeks before the earthquake hit in February 2011. So I've learned an enormous amount. I've been in the sort of the construction industry for the last 15 years, although my original education is as a chartered accountant. So I suppose I fell into the management of construction and have been thoroughly enjoying it, and struggle to see myself doing anything else at the moment in the future. So it's a great industry to be in, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. I've got a number of slides to work through with you today as we speak within my allotted time. There's probably too many. I probably struggled a bit to try and work out how to synthesize down the story that I wanted to talk to you about today. So what might occur is if I'm getting too close to the end of my time, I'll whiz through a few, but I've said to Matt that I'm more than happy that these slides get shared and more than happy that anyone contacts me directly. So Matt will share my contact details, etc., and you can contact me directly if there's any particular components. I certainly don't come in front of you today to purport to be a safety expert of any sort. As I say, my background is in first of all in finance, then in construction, business development, construction management. So my safety journey is a learning one, and so I know there's probably a lot of experts listening who will know a lot more than me that is about safety, etc. And most of my story today is a little bit about how at Connetics we've tried to do things differently as an organisation, of which safety is a benefactor of it, rather than me being here to tell you about how we directly influence safety. So I'll try and talk that. The other thing I'm not an expert in is PowerPoint slides. So the presentation of them is fairly boring, but you'll bear with me as we go through that. So I want to start a little bit about telling you, just before we get into it further, where our journey actually started. And it was really about 2014, 2015. So I've been Chief Executive next about 3 or 4 years. And what those first 3 or 4 years were really what we'd call earthquake recovery. So we grew from about 200 staff to nearly 400. Most of that was in direct reaction to the earthquake response. As being a chief executive, I didn't have to worry too much about the future strategy because we were just really reacting to what was in front of us. It was an incredibly inspiring time, amazing seeing when communities come together and people put the community before themselves, how much you can achieve. Whilst I know it was just brutal for everyone that lived in it, worked in it, and had to deal with it, and all the insurance issues and things like that. It was probably the most inspiring time, in terms of working at Connetics. But what was the realisation is as we started to come out of that, we started to look under the hood of our organisation to see what sort of organisation we actually were. And I'll tell you a bit more as we go about how we did that. But 2 things really slapped me in the face from some feedback we got. So we engaged some external assistance to try and really understand what our organisational culture was like and what it was like in terms of driving improvement, etc. And 2 things stuck out after a series of interviews. With this quote, is that one of our staff members told us that Connetics is a place where good ideas go to die. And another staff member said, if I had good ideas, I'd usually tell my dog because I'd get a better response. And those are incredibly challenging pieces of feedback to receive. So like all organisations, we were trumpeting how we needed to be innovative and drive improvement, and we needed to get better in service of the future and things like that. But underneath the hood of the organisation was just a culture of, no matter what people had or what they wanted to contribute, it just wasn't getting out. And like I say, I've been there 3 or 4 years, and I thought I was doing a great job trying to get the organisation driven to more focus on improvement in the future, etc. Things like that. So this was incredibly confronting. So I suppose from that is where my story begins, and what I'll talk through today. And some of this, look, if you've heard me talk before, there'll be a bit of repetitiveness in this. I apologise for that. Our story is still emerging, and some of the things that we started, I can give you a little bit of feedback we've got to, etc. So, but before we talk about it, and that's why I really wanted to give you that context of the start of our story, and I'll give you a bit more in that context about Connetics, because I think it's incredibly important that you understand that the frame of which we've looked at our improvement journey, because this won't be the same for every organisation, and that's because everyone has a different context. It'd be very easy for me to tell you a whole heap of stuff about the content of what we've got done, but not really give you enough context of how we've shaped our thinking. And so because some context is so important, that it just can shape everything. And someone gave me a great example of context once. It was, so 2 people are going to work on this very same day, and they both get a flat tire. For one of them, they were going to work for a day that they didn't really want to be at. And they had things to do they didn't really want to do. It was going to be a boring day. The other person was excited because when they got to work, they had to pick something up, then they were getting on a plane to fly to another part of their business, and they were going to work on some improvement. They were really excited. So the same thing occurred, that there were 2 flat tires, but the context of which those 2 individuals looked at the flat tires gave them a completely different look at the content. So the content was the flat tire, the context shifts. So I just want to say is that context is so vital, and you'll probably hear me talk a bit about that today, because I think that is, if you want to start looking and diving into your journey about how to improve the way you drive safety and improvement and culture in your organisation, one of the most important things is to understand the context of which your current people see the world. And I'll talk more about that as we go. So a bit about Connetics' context. As I said, Connetics is where I'm the CEO. I've been there for 9 years. So we're an electrical distribution contractor. So what that means is we look after or build and maintain the electricity distribution networks, which is from the moment it leaves the Transpower national grid to basically the power arriving at your front gate. We look after that network. So Orion, we predominantly work for Orion. We've got 300 staff based in Christchurch. We've got 30 people operating for Wellington Electricity doing a similar thing, and we've just recently in the process of establishing another team of 30 down in Central Otago working for the Aurora network. So they manage and own the network and have the interaction with the customer. We basically build it and maintain it. Connetics is it's got a reasonably low profile, because we like to think that if you don't know about us, then hopefully you haven't had any problems with your power. So we're quite a low profile organisation that employs nearly 400 people across mainly Canterbury and Wellington in Central Otago. One thing that's very distinctive with the context about our organisation is that we're basically a fully mobile workforce. So virtually none of our work happens in our controlled sites. We operate, Orion alone has about 100,000 sites where we could be on any one day. So we work in what we call uncontrolled environments, and because they're uncontrolled, we're at the mercy of the environment in which we work in. Could be traffic, could be weather, could be public access, those sorts of things. So it's quite different to operating what I call a more static workforce, which is within, say, a manufacturing environment, things like that. Probably no less complicated, but it's just a different dynamic. We also, the electrical industry has been heavily prescribed in terms of safety acts for a very long time. So the Electrical Safety Act has been in place since 1992. There's been a number of regulations. We have a licensing board, etc. There's lots of individual network requirements. So how we act safely or how we operate is not something that a lot of the time we have to actually determine. The rules are made for us to operate within. The big challenge is how do we take those rules, which are fairly detailed, often drafted and developed by engineers, and then having to be applied within a highly variable workforce with trade resource, etc. So one of the challenges being is that we're very well regulated. Is how do we actually get people to understand the regulation, etc., and how to apply it in practice? But we don't have to create a lot of those rules ourselves. As I said before, the starting point of our journey was really 2016. We had done, up until that point, done probably what everyone, the more traditional view of the world is that we were used to run engagement surveys, etc., and our scores gave us the sort of the 7 out of 10s and things like that that often you get. But we never really got the content of the information or the detail of the information that really underpinned who we were as an organisational culture. So we asked an external organisation to come in, and they interviewed 25 people picked at random for a 1-hour phone call. And this is what they came back and sort of said, this is where we are actually at. And I asked them to be as blunt as they needed to be. And so we had these 5 things that were really our starting point, which is there was a passive engagement. People had been sort of stuck in that waiting to be told. And that was really about the feedback that was a little bit of the, if I do what others tell me to do, then I sort of can't be wrong and held accountable, which is something that has been generated over many years. We're the win-lose culture, a lot of what we call siloed behaviour, which is not unusual, where some teams would put their own goals ahead of the organisation as a whole. The one that probably that hit me the hardest was the fact that people, because there was a lack of feedback and a little bit like that, I'd rather tell my dog because he might give me a better response, meant that there was a why bother culture. There was no point suggesting improvement unless because no one would listen. There was a lack of kinetic story really to work with that, and our information flow was fractured in that there was lots of information, but what was the source of the truth? I think the feedback was that people believed rumours and gossip over other information, things like that. So it's a bit full frontal to get this information smacked upon you, but it's better to start with the reality of where you're at, because you can, if you start down a journey with something to drive improvement, but you actually don't know your starting point, you can end up in sort of the wrong end point, and then get confused why your initiatives and things didn't work. A lot of the challenges that people blame the actual initiative, but actually what the problem was in the first place, we didn't understand the starting point of what we were working with. The other thing that's really full on for our industry is the fact that we are going to go through, like many industries, pretty significant change. In our industry, there's been probably over the last sort of 20, 25 years, a sort of an underinvestment in the assets required in terms of the spend required to keep pace with a growing New Zealand. And that's always a challenge. I think any infrastructure asset owner has the challenge of is that New Zealand had massive growth in the 50s and 60s, post-war. Most of the assets in our industry last about 50 to 60 years, which if you add those two together, you sort of fast forward to about 2020. So we really are at a point where there's going to be needs to be significant investment. There's been investment, but if it's been sufficient, because at the same time in that 60 years, our population has quadrupled. So that's one of the big challenges. There's been probably an underinvestment in capability over the last 20-odd years. New Zealand, our industry was created out of things like the New Zealand Electricity Department, where they used to spend vast amounts of money investing in the future. And for the last 20 years, probably we've underinvested in capability. Government is starting to impose regulatory challenges on our industry in terms of the amount people pay for power, etc., which is an ongoing debate as to what's the right way to value the investment in power, etc., and electricity. As with most industries, we're going to be subject to a significant shift in technology that will can significantly benefit humanity, but also, of course, going to be challenging in terms of disruption to the way we provide services at the moment. And the last one is, as I said before, population growth demand. New Zealand's not getting any smaller. I read the other day by 2030 we'll be at near 5.5 million people, and the world's population will have grown by another billion. So, so population growth is going to put huge demand on our services. One of the exciting things for the electrical industry is the fact that electrical energy, and in particular New Zealand has a lot of renewable energy, is that it's a huge opportunity to use those networks to actually decarbonise New Zealand. So we work for an industry that I think going to grow significantly in terms of its use and volume, and so it's an exciting industry to be in. So that really gives us our context of the way we look at future resourcing is that the predicted demand for capable people in the industry is going in the opposite direction from the predicted supply. Now, this is a graph that doesn't have quantums associated with it. It's an interpretation of all the our analysis. But the problem being is that we're entering an age where a number of the people that are retiring from our industry are leaving with 30 to 40 years experience. And whilst we're doing as much as we can to increase the capacity, i.e. bring new people into our industry, they're not coming in with the same level of experience that what's leaving. And so what we're ending up with is a significant capability gap. And capability is one of the cornerstones of a good safety performance. So I think that whilst the challenge is a big one to overcome in terms of just getting the people, the big challenge that we have to deal with is that what's that going to cause in terms of the capability needed to meet the future requirements, and how's that capability gap going to manifest itself in terms of the way we perform in our safety, in our quality, in our financial timeliness, etc. So we're not. I don't think we're alone in that industry makeup, and so but it is something that's going to hit us hard if we don't change the way we do work. And change the way we develop people, and change the way we interact, and we can maximise what we've got out of our existing resources and grow new ones. So that sort of ends my sort of thing. So Connetics, it's a really exciting industry to be involved in. We've got a really bright future in terms of demand for our services, which is exciting. But we have a challenge where we have an aging workforce we're not replenishing at the speed we need to. And secondly, we're sitting on an organisational culture that really wasn't conducive to continuous improvement and the right culture for an organisation. And so I suppose, and I suppose when I looked at my journey through this, is that when I first started looking at how to improve our safety performance, I keep talking about the fact that we had good systems and processes, we've got trained people, we've invested heavily in all the right things. There must be something wrong, and I got trapped in this sort of cycle of, first of all, is blaming the people. You know, I'll openly admit that I was in that state of if you just didn't have people making stupid decisions, all of a sudden would be safe. I got trapped in that cycle. The other thing I got trapped in was the idea that safety culture was something different to the organisational culture. So we kept looking at initiatives at how you would improve your safety culture, and thinking that somehow the safety culture was a culture that was different to everything else in the organisation. So it wasn't until, and I wasn't even, it's one of those things, I wasn't even looking in the direction of the right of how to improve this. But I went to a Safety Differently masterclass in Brisbane, which was run by Art of Work, and Daniel Commodore was the facilitator. Probably a number of you have probably struck Daniel either in that role or more recently as one of the chief innovation officer or something of those fancy titles at WorkSafe. And Daniel and I have become good friends, and we talk regularly about how we could improve the safety world. But we went to the Safety Differently masterclass in Brisbane, and I sat there for the day, probably in the room surrounded by mostly people from the safety industry. So I was a bit like fish out of water because I didn't really have the same level of expertise. And what struck me is that what was being said had a full safety lens. So Safety Differently, Safety 2, all that had a full safety lens. But what struck me was actually you can't look at safety separately from the way you look at work. And you can't look at safety differently from the way you look at your entire organisation. So I started to, the journey examining, well, what would that actually mean if we didn't look at a safety differently journey, but we looked at what we call the Connetics differently journey. which is using the basic principles of safety differently, i.e. people are the solution, learn from the positives, not the absence of negatives, and it's a ethical responsibility, not a bureaucratic accountability. That's the basic principles of safety differently. And how that might work if we actually applied that to a work context, and then shifting the idea that if you have good safety, you have good work, to the idea that if you have good work, you'll highly likely have good safety. So it's a contextual shift in the way we looked at this. So excuse me, I'm just going to jump in. So we started on a journey of creating a Connetics safety, Connetics differently plan from 2016. So it was about end of 2016. As I said, we were sort of guilty of the past of thinking about this differently. We really wanted to integrate this as a whole. And I'm sort of probably one of my big learnings is that, and I think we were lucky we went down this path, is that I'm now wondering whether you can actually do safety differently well, if people are exploring that, unless the entire organisation is looking at the philosophies for every aspect of your business. I think doing it in safety on its own would create benefit. There's no doubt about that. But would it really be able to engender this quantum of benefits that you need to really to try and generate? So, or could generate from this if you did it holistically for the organisation. And that's a big challenge because it's a fundamental shift in the way you operate. And I'm going to talk through that a bit now. Is that these are the sort of, I sort of think back, and what I would need you to know is that we didn't write this stuff down at the start. We didn't have a plan of how we do Connetics differently. This plan that looks like a plan here is actually retrospective. But now that we know how important these aspects are, this is why I thought it would be important that if I was to leave with any messages today, to start on what I call the differently journey. These are the things that I think that you need to really tackle, and I'll try and deal with these in a few slides following. Is first of all deciding how much impact you want to have. Do you want to make a small improvement or a fundamental shift? Those are really big things. Might seem a small difference, but it'll fundamentally change the way you look at differently. I got a great example of that a while ago. Is that we were listening. We got a guy by the name of Kevin Bigger. I don't know if you know Kevin Bigger, but I think he's on one of those Intrepid New Zealand journeys where he's with a mate and they get dropped into random parts of New Zealand and then they have to follow a path that was taken from an initial explorer or something like that. Anyway, he was a really inspirational guy, and he actually he won the Cross Atlantic rowing race. I think that's what it's called, North Atlantic. And when he spoke about it, it was one of those ones he entered when he was drunk one night, and then woke up the next morning and hoped that everyone else had forgotten that he had entered. But he stuck to it. Anyway, he said he went to a trainer, and the trainer asked him a very distinct question. He said, so you're entering the race. Do you want to enter to win, or do you want to enter to cross the finish line? And he said, well, why do I have to decide that? And he said, well, from this day forward, whatever decision you make, will be a fundamental shift to everything we do going forward. And I think that's a little bit like what I mean by decide how much impact what you have. I want to talk about what sort of culture do you want. I think I'm going to use a familiar template for that. How you're going to operate, you need to decide how your organisation is going to operate, what sort of leadership you need, how teams will work together at managing the dysfunction that may occur as a result between operational and support functions, i.e. like line management of operations and maybe the health and safety function, things like that. How you need to sort of have a plan for how you're going to address that in advance. And what are some of the things you can do to get started? So I'll just flick through those. And I'll go reasonably quickly, so apologies if I do. So the basic principles of safety differently. So just to go back, if you haven't seen this before, the traditional view of safety is that the system is safe. Accidents happen because people deviate from a well-prescribed plan. Variability is a threat, and if it's a threat, it needs to be controlled. Often we think people are a liability, and therefore procedural compliance is mandatory. And the last thing is, how can we change people? That's the bit I was trapped in that. Safety differently takes a view of the system itself is not safe. Accidents happen when resources are not equal to the demands that are required. Variability is inevitable. Only people can adapt. accommodate and absorb to emerging threats, and you're left with the question, how can people be supported to adapt successfully? So it's just a different view. So we've used that differently philosophy across our entire organisation. So in terms of understanding the level of impact you want to make, and so we use this chart, which I've borrowed officially from some training we did a little while ago, and that's trying to understand what sort of level of impact. So level of impact of performance up the left-hand chart. So if your level of impact is you want predictable or BAU, then you can use existing levels of competency. If you want it to be a stretch performance, like as in 10% more than what you currently do, what the tendency is there, the capacity you'll need is to work harder and longer for what you do now. So you don't have to do anything different, you just have to dig deep and work harder than what you're doing at the moment. And that's a very valid way if you want to get small incremental. The third one, which is called blue sky, and actually when it gets someone like comes up with a blue sky idea, people struggle to relate to it, and actually what tends to happen is they don't actually go after it, and what happens is your performance ends up similar to what BAU would be, is in that people don't go after it. What we were going for is what we called a breakthrough in performance, which is possible but not predictable, and the thing there was it required new thinking and innovation. And we thought that where it needed new thinking and innovation was in the way we lead, the way we're managed and governed, how we work together, and how we mix our strengths and capabilities. So what we were saying is we didn't want to just get a stretch target, a small increase. We wanted to actually make a breakthrough in the performance that we had. We'd had pretty solid performance as an organisation, but to be able to move to the next level and even start to consider living in the agile world that's in front of us, we had to really make a breakthrough in the way we thought about stuff, how we innovated, how we worked as a team, etc. So that's really important. So it's really important that, and it's not to brush over this, is what is the magnitude of the impact that you're trying to create? And none of them are wrong. It's just that that you just need to be really clear about that. That will determine then how you go about it, which actually leads the same thing into that, like what sort of culture you want. And like I say, to make it aligned to possibly what you may have seen before, I think this is the Hudson model, I think it's called, is that, what sort of culture do you want for your organisation? So like I say, I've used the safety one just to give you an example. But, of course, we're likely all going to put a circle around the green at the top. It's sort of like it's not allowed not to put that there. It's really important, but realising that the steps from the other colours to the green are not necessarily a linear step. Sometimes that when you get to the yellow, which is proactive, which is you might consider good, if you want to be great, one of the things you've got to do is break apart good to get to great. And that's kind of a challenging headspace to deal with, because it may feel like you have to go backwards to go forwards, which is quite common if in a financial sense. So in a financial sense, probably everybody's heard of sort of hockey stick growth. You have to invest and dig in, and then you might have a period where your costs are down, etc., or your profits are down, and then you need to. But then after a while, you get the growth that comes from that. That's pretty tough to do in a safety world, because what does that downward trend actually mean? Like, obviously no one wants to hurt anybody or worse. So, we probably stick more closely in the safety space to the tried and true, because breaking it apart to look at the world differently might cause issues in the short term. So, so I truly understand why that is sometimes difficult. But what I'm saying here, the main point of that is that whilst we all want to be in the green, the path towards that is not linear. And I think that's why we need to really have a look at the way we work or the way we operate. So what we then went from Connetics is looking at it was really important for us to understand how we were going to work. And to be clear, I'm not a massive fan of values statements, as in values that end up on the walls, one word type values. I just declare that I'm not a massive fan of them. I'd rather work on a really clear set of what we call organisational or operating model design principles. So these are, and what we needed to do was not only make them about the statement, but how practically they'd be applied in the business. And so we put them in a distinct order, in that we needed our people to be the solution rather than a variable to be controlled. So that's very much a differently principle. But the key thing there is that they needed to be enabled to be the solution, not just here are the keys, do what you like, which is what a lot of people probably confront when they are working on people are the solution as a theory. They have to be enabled to be the solution. People also need to be enabled to collaborate and develop the best solutions in a given context. One of the things there is that lots of organisations, and one of them wants to talk about how do we want our people to collaborate, but actually throwing people in the room and just telling them to collaborate doesn't usually have a good ending, because what tends to happen is that there's a high level of confusion between collaboration and consensus, and consensus often ends up in committee management decisions, which are not usually fast and are usually trying to make everyone happy, etc. So you need, actually, if you want people to collaborate, you actually have to enable them to collaborate by offering things like expert facilitation, really good goal setting, reporting, measurement, that sort of stuff. So that doesn't come easily. So people have to be enabled to collaborate. Thirdly, people have to be enabled to experiment and learn safely. Failure has to be acceptable in an organisation if you want to be able to experiment and innovate. So often you hear we're an innovative company but just don't fail. Those words aren't exactly used, but I think it's a common thing that goes on, is that we don't give enough people permission to create and learn safely. Obviously with safety in mind, we want people to learn safely, not learn through accidents, etc. Number 4, people are enabled to adapt and perform quickly in an ever-changing and constantly changing ambiguous environment. So speed of decision-making, those sort of things is absolutely important if we wanted to change the way we operate. And lastly, and probably the most important of all, is that everything has to be transparent in the organisation. And so those are the transparency across all things. Honesty, openness, those is absolutely critical if you want any of those other 4 to be ingrained. So I won't go through what this means practically, because that's what it means practically to us at Connetics, but those are our design principles. It's really important for us to work. So this is what we thought would get us to where we wanted. What we thought won't get us there is our traditional view of the way we've operated in the past. So we knew that traditionally we relied on hierarchy and organisational structure, and what we would tend to do is if the structure wasn't right, we'd just reorganise and just keep reorganising, hoping that one day we'd come up with some sort of magical organisational structure that would then work. People only working to accountabilities. I have a job description, and that's all I do. That's not going to be part of a future that supports our way of working. People have the idea of people having one job and one team with one manager. People working in areas that they don't actually like. Using formal bureaucratic change processes and people fearing experimentation. So and dangerously, if you ignore behaviour, lots of people perform well, but is their behaviour aligned to what you're trying to achieve? So that traditional shift, and I actually saw this diagram on Matt's earlier slides. So we're moving from the traditional view of the past that we isolate and we work in a team, and that team's who we care about. And yes, we do work for an organisation we care about, but actually as long as my team is successful, I can't be held accountable for what goes on in the rest of the team. So the idea of the future being that it's more of a grid of networks. So none of that is new. The challenge being is how would we even consider operating in that space? And one of the things that really was evident to us in terms of the way we operated and really distinctly operated in safety is we were operating in the left-hand box of those two, and we needed to shift to the right. And the only way to do that was to shift the way we lead. So we had to, you can't, I think we, as chief executives, are guilty of looking and saying we want the organisation to operate in the right-hand design. That's what we aspire to, but we run the business like the left-hand side. And they don't actually mix. So we have to think about it. So we set up a path of shifting our leadership approach, and particularly shifting the way we drive improvement, or drive the organisation as a whole. But you see it more frequently in improvement. So I'll give you 3 diagrams to try and explain our shift in leadership. First of all, is that as a leader, you are bombarded with things that people want to see improve. Teams, families, families and friends, my manager, clients, even your own personal desire to see. So you are, as a leader, and we all are leaders, I'm not talking about a hierarchical leader, I'm talking about someone who leads others of any sort, whether by position, title or not. That's the role that you find yourself in. Now, the traditional response to that, and what we call hero leadership, is that the leader needs to do something. The leader will sit down and take on accountability for doing all the thinking, make a plan. The leader will then tell their people what's going to happen, and the initial result, the results could be a good decision. I'm not saying that there aren't leaders out there that aren't making good decisions. People will improve, people will commit, people will improve, and the leader will get credit. If it's a bad decision, though, which sometimes also occurs, bad decision, people don't improve, no improvement in performance, and what is left is blame. Now, I presented this to some of my field crews, and what their feedback was that Connetics originally would have won a medal for our ability to be hero leaders. We were at the top of our class of hero leadership. And that's why so much was built in there about that. Why bother? Because no one listens, or someone else just makes all the decisions for us. We're just going to wait to be told. So that was our model. And what we wanted to shift to was the idea of host leadership, which is the leader. The first thing is realize it doesn't have to have the solution, but know he needs to do something. Their role is not to actually do anything, but to establish the compelling future they're committed to, as in what sort of impact do they want to have. The leader's job is to enroll others, make sure they understand the context, and collectively commit to a future. This is all before you start taking action. Then it's about, we design a team, we get a team together, which could be, in our organisation, could be field staff, could be office staff. We have expert facilitators that we've employed to help us with this, and they design the solution. Now, the two results are, if it's a good solution, as it was with the other one, everyone commits and everyone shares in the success. The magic is if it didn't work out as expected, because people were involved in the creation, they're still committed to the outcome and usually get on board and try again. So it's just a totally different shift in leadership. The interesting thing is as a leader, when you actually sit down and adopt the first, that the leader doesn't have all the solutions but knows he needs to do something, a huge amount of weight comes off your shoulders, because all of a sudden now you're not the font of all knowledge. You can actually go, my job is to go, what are we actually trying to achieve, and who do I need around me to succeed? And you don't have to worry about being an imposter anymore or anything like that. It actually is freeing to actually go, I know I need to do something, but I don't have all the answers, and I'll work with my people to achieve it. So shifting from hero to host is shifting from people from a variable that needs to be controlled to people that are the solution to an organisation's challenges. You've got to rely on instructions and directions to enrol in commitment through context and outcomes, working to accountabilities as opposed to taking full responsibility. Privacy, as in, I need to know all this myself, and I'm going to lock it down to transparency and vulnerability. And a hero leader changes through formal plans, and a host leader looks more to trust and experimentation. So that's a shift. Now, don't get me wrong, we have still got some serious work to do to get ourselves into the world of being a fully host leader and not end up in committee making decisions and all those sorts of things. We're on a journey. But you've got to, if you want to deal with this, or if you want to tackle, my view is my view of the only way to shift forward is to really look at how you're leading people. You can't ask people to be the solutions if you're going to lead them as if they need a variable that needs to be controlled. So it's just shifting from the rhetoric of what we want as leadership to the actual action. Now, there's a possibility that you smash into some challenges, though, when doing this, and a little bit, as we call it, the downward spiral of dysfunction, which is what can occur under probably what I'd call more hero leadership style, which is that, and I'll use business unit support functions. What I mean by a business unit might be an operational unit. For us, it's like one of the contracting teams. Support function might be, in our instance, could be IT, could be finance, could be HR, could be health and safety. And what happens if they don't host each other to define effective solutions, i.e. one of them designs it and tries to impose it on the other? They're designing solutions in isolation, and which are often ineffective. And for example, what that might mean is that somebody we use safety as an example, designs a best practice solution, but that best practice doesn't actually fit the operational requirements. So it's not a best fit. So we've shifted our thinking to best practice to best fit. Best fit may not always be best practice, and that's a challenge sometimes. But if you design them in isolation and they're ineffective, then it's not going to work anyway. Business unit support functions then don't take responsibility for all the outcomes, i.e. it's not my design, it's yours, so we're not responsible for it. There's lots of conflict, frustration, avoidance and blame, often resulting in the demand for more compliance and further avoidance, and what ends up is that there is some sort of more senior management intervention forcing hero leadership to return. So the concept being is that host leadership gives the ability right at the start to get the right people around the table to design best fit solutions to stop the spiral of dysfunction, which is what we see, or we're seeing so often, and sometimes still do. So like I say, I'm not standing in front of you today suggesting that we have this all sorted, but that's where we're targeting. The other one is really looking at going, where you might smack into issues is that if anyone's ever done any work associated with the way teams work together, I highly recommend research into Patrick Lencioni. Patrick Lencioni does some amazing work on teamwork. I think he's got a book, something about dysfunctional teams. I can't remember the exact title, but he looks at this and going, the triangle of team performance, and we've used this a lot for ours, in that most of the time in the past we've probably looked at this triangle from the top down, demand results and expect accountability, and then you generate commitment and there might be some conflict, whereas actually the way to look at this is the complete opposite, that you've got to look at this from the bottom up, is that you can't get results unless you've got, you need trust. Trust is the underpinning value or perspective of being able to have good conflict. You can't have good conflict unless you actually trust each other, and you trust each other's the way that we look at the world. We're vulnerable with each other. We say when we don't know. We apologise. Those sort of things. You can't get commitment unless you've actually had good conflict. Because if you haven't had good conflict, what tends to happen is that people in the room are left with unresolved conflict and they are not committed, etc. And you can't have accountability. So I won't delve into it much, but I would highly recommend some research into that area. Some practical things that we have done. So what we have done. So I'm just going to grab a note so I can speak knowledgeably about this. Is that the key really is that, as I said before, collaboration is about getting people together with different views of the world, but who are committed and aligned to the successful and agreed outcome. So it's not about going into it going, I want to get my bit, and if I don't get my bit, I'm taking my bat and ball and going home, etc. It's about true collaboration to work through the process of finding a successful outcome for the whole of Connetics. But as I said before, you can't just put people in a room and ask them to collaborate without either some training, some facilitation, some support, giving them ownership, giving them full ownership, and the last one, probably the most important one, is giving them permission to act. So we've had a number of here, and these are just 3 examples. So we used what we called the Big 3. The Big 3 was about redesigning or re-engineering our processes for all of our operational part of our activity, including integrating all of our safety processes into our operational workflow. The reason it was called Big 3 is there was 3 big projects, and no one was smart enough to remember all 3, so we just called them the Big 3, and it became colloquially termed as our project for re-engineering the process. We created the Work Improvement Team, which was an environment or a vehicle for people from all aspects of the organisation to be able to identify, prioritise, and then deliver micro improvements across the organisation. So they have mandate to be able to decide on what's going to work, develop budgets, plans, and then to deliver a whole series of improvements across the business. A lot of them are done without my knowledge at all, and they have done some fantastic stuff. They're an amazing sounding board for the organisation in terms of if we want to try and improve it for the whole organisation, we use them as our sounding board to etc. And so it's a highly empowered team called the Work Improvement Team. And they work highly interrelated with the traditional health and safety committee, etc. And the collective insights is things like when we've had some pretty serious incidents, etc. Rather than the standard investigation, ICAM investigation, we do a collective insights where we get a whole series of people who also do the same work as those that had the incident, and we look at all the insights into how things could have happened, how practical drift might have occurred, etc., etc. So those are just some practical examples, and I can certainly give you more directly if anyone wants to contact me directly to talk about those, or come and see them in action. More than happy. We've hosted a few organisations to do that. So what we're starting to see, I'll rush through these because they're there, is that people are starting to ask for more advice. Leaders seem to be willing to take on more because they realise they don't have to have all the answers. So their now role is they can host more rather than have to hero more, if that's the best way to do it. I think the bit that's probably the most important thing to me is people are starting to become more human, which is fantastic. There's the humanness is starting to return to our organisation. However, you do sometimes smack into a couple of things, and that is that the fear of the unknown and the fear of that people, even though they know it might not be successful at the moment, that the challenge is that they know how to do that and sometimes get stuck living with disappointment as long as it's familiar and safe. And the other thing that probably, and this is a concept I encourage you to use, is that a lot of people are left in a state where they feel like they can't say what they actually think. And if they can't say what they actually think, their ability to get truly committed is very difficult. So this is just a great picture I got from a training course once that said, the yellow boxes is what we often say in a meeting when our manager or someone in authority comes up with a brand new spanking idea, and the grey boxes are what we possibly might be thinking. And the challenge being there is that we are, in that we are left operating probably more consistent with the grey boxes than we are with the what we actually say out loud. So if people don't feel safe to be able to release their background conversations, then they're unlikely to get fully committed. Now, Matt's just come into the room. Am I getting close to the end of my time, Matt? I could have talked for hours. Can I just point out, Matt, because this is on the slides. Yes. The next few slides are really going to be. I was going to talk a little bit about the difference between complicated and complex systems. Yep. I encourage everyone just to read that article link. It's an article if you haven't ever gotten onto the Safety Differently website. If you're curious about safety, I would highly encourage you to go and read the article about complicated versus complex. I just copied a few things in there. I think what we try and do, Matt, is when we're looking at safety systems, we try and put them in the complicated box, whereas actually we've got to embrace complexity. Yep. So complicated might be your car engine. If a part of it breaks, you fix that part, the engine goes. But a complex is when you start adding in all the human dynamics and variability. Yep. And what we try and do a lot of the time is when we try and drive investigative work, is we try and break it down into a number of fixes, thinking that if we fix those components, all of a sudden the components will work together again. But I think the quote that I liked out of this article the most was this one here, is to manage a system effectively, you might focus on the interaction of the parts rather than their behaviour taken separately. And I think that's what sometimes we find in our safety investigation process. We try and get our investigation down to a series of broken parts, and we end up with this world of, if we have another process, we do some training, and we buy a new tool, we're all of a sudden safe again, and that's unlikely to be the outcome. So just to finish, as I said before, our people are the solution, and the only way to make those people a solution is that through collaboration they'll design the best solution. So that's the end of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jono.
That's okay.
I know there has been one or two questions come through.
Oh, has there? Okay.
So I'm just going to see if I can find them. Okay. And some of you may already be able to see Naomi in the background there. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Naomi.
Who is our next amazing, fantastic keynote speaker. However,
yes.
Before we meet Naomi, I just wanted to table some questions. So we've got Noyan, who is part of the support team. She's
yes.
in.
Yep.
And she's wondering, how is the journey towards enabling the people going? What are some of the roadblocks that you face? Yeah,
look, that's a really good question, and it's been what I call not a smooth journey, because we are fundamentally shifting the way people view their role as a leader of an organisation, what their role is as an employee or staff member of the organisation, and it's been rocky. The roadblocks we mainly face is helping people to collaborate differently. I think there's another question here which I think I could probably tie into, is that can you use host leadership process for all decisions? And I think actually what we try to do is probably, yes, use it for all decisions, and I think that's a mistake. You've got to look at if if in my slides you'll see a thing there called the Connetics framework. When it comes to things like simple decision making, you don't necessarily always need to have collaborative thinking, host leadership. When it comes to things like complex or even chaotic decision making, yes, either the only solution is host leadership. And I can't remember. There's a Swiss or a Swedish company that talk about collaborative hierarchy, and I'm going to do a bit more exploration into that, which is when to be collaborative and when to use hierarchical decision making. So I think our rockiness or roadblocks, as put with the professionals, is we probably try to put everything into the banner of this. Whereas actually, I'd look at it and go, is the problem simple or complicated? You can probably use traditional decision making. If it's complex or chaotic, then I think there's no other choice but to use host leadership type decision making. Yep.
Now I'm going to be really sneaky and sneak in a question myself.
Oh, sure.
I guess the reason why this group was formed in the first place was for a peer group to bounce ideas off one another to feel part of it.
Yes.
Now, from what you've talked about, from what I know of you in the past, Jono, it's very clear that you are at the forefront and potentially going to stand among only a few others within the business leadership.
Yeah.
So, who does Jono Brent turn to?
That's a good question, and look, it's a lot of people. There's a lot of people certainly desiring to think this way, Matt. It's not like, it's more around is how do you start, because by starting, it might actually go bad for a little while. And actually, a lot of people go, and this is the interesting challenge, is after using the safety differently principles for 6 months, people go, all of a sudden my stats are worse. Mm-hmm. So it must be safety differently that's driving this being wrong. But actually what you're doing, you're opening up a pathway towards that information that previously might have been hidden within the organisation. So I certainly challenge you to stay the course. So a lot of the time I look internationally.
Yeah.
So because New Zealand's, the thinking that's been in place here is we're a catch up, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So in New Zealand, there's the best person to talk to is Daniel Hamador, and it works having Daniel will be open arms to any conversation you want to have about safety innovation. There's some amazing companies in Australia like Lang O'Rourke, Art of Work, who I'm associated with. A number of other entities. BHP is huge. BHP is one of the largest companies in Australia, and it's trying to endeavour to take safety principles throughout its organisation, or even further into the UK, etc. So, and I've found without doubt that anyone that's in this journey, because as you say, you feel a bit alone. If someone else rings you up and says, "Do you want to have a talk about it?" then they can't give you enough time. There's so much time they want to give you because they just want to engage. And I'd be more than happy to share some of the context of the people that have helped me, because I'm absolutely confident they'll help anyone as well. So yeah. Fantastic. So as I say, anything in this, Matt, totally shared, and please feel free to share my contacts. I'm not an expert in this. I'm just inquiring the fact that I think there's the way we've been doing it in the past fundamentally isn't going to get us to the place we all desire. So that's where I sit back.
What a brilliant way to finish. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Very good. Appreciate that. I'll leave it. And to everyone there, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the